The frigid winds of the high plains tore at Ilara's threadbare shawl, a cruel symphony mirroring the tempest raging within her heart. Each gust felt like a mocking whisper, carrying the echoes of her father's harsh pronouncements and her brother's cold betrayal. The blizzard, a white shroud descending upon the vast, unforgiving landscape, threatened to consume her entirely, much like the despair that gnawed at her spirit. Her breath plumed in ragged gasps, each one a fragile testament to a life clinging desperately to its last embers. The once vibrant hues of her hope had been leached away by months of relentless cruelty, leaving behind a stark, monochrome existence. The biting cold was a physical manifestation of the emotional desolation she had endured since her own kin had cast her out, a lamb offered to the wolves of a desolate frontier. Her slender fingers, numb and aching, clutched a small, worn leather-bound book, the last tangible link to a life of relative comfort and affection, a life brutally severed by the greed and fear of those she had once called family. They had judged her, condemned her, and ultimately abandoned her to a fate worse than death, all for a perceived transgression, a baseless accusation fueled by malice and ignorance. The snow, thick and relentless, swirled around her, obscuring the path, blurring the line between solid ground and treacherous abyss. Each faltering step was a battle, a small victory against the overwhelming forces of nature and human unkindness. Her vision, already hazy from exhaustion and hunger, began to narrow, the world shrinking to a tunnel of white, the sounds of the storm fading into a dull roar. Ilara, a woman forged in gentler climes, now stood at the precipice of oblivion, a lone figure against the backdrop of an indifferent, majestic wilderness. This was not the future she had envisioned, not the life promised by the genteel society she had once inhabited. This was the raw, untamed frontier, a place that stripped away pretense and exposed the fragile core of existence. Her family, blinded by their rigid beliefs and swayed by the manipulations of a venomous few, had turned their backs on her, leaving her to face the howling wolves of winter and the even more predatory nature of man. The memory of their faces, contorted by anger and self-righteousness, was a sharper sting than the icy wind. Their words, delivered with the righteous indignation of those convinced of their own infallible judgment, pierced her soul, leaving wounds that festered in the bitter cold. She had nowhere to go, no one to turn to, save for the fleeting kindness of strangers who offered meager provisions and hurried warnings about the dangers of traveling alone. But even their compassion was finite, their resources stretched thin by their own struggles. The frontier offered little solace to the vulnerable, its vastness mirroring the boundless depths of her loneliness. As her strength waned, a chilling realization settled upon her. This might be her final journey, her last desperate stand against the encroaching darkness. Yet, even in the face of such overwhelming despair, a tiny flicker of defiance remained, a stubborn refusal to yield entirely. She had survived this long, against all odds, and something within her, an unyielding spirit, urged her forward, one more step, just one more. The snow piled higher, threatening to bury her alive, a cold, indifferent tomb. Her eyelids grew heavy, her body screaming for the sweet release of oblivion. But then, a faint, almost imperceptible sound, a distant whinny, pierced the storm's cacophony. A phantom sound, perhaps, a hallucination born of a fading mind. Or perhaps, a whisper of hope carried on the merciless wind. This is a story of resilience, of the unyielding spirit of a woman abandoned by her own blood, cast into the crucible of the untamed West. It is a tale of a love born not of convenience or societal expectation, but forged in the fires of adversity, a bond between two souls who found solace and strength in each other's unexpected presence. It is a testament to the profound truth that sometimes, the most profound connections are found in the most unlikely of places, with the most unexpected of people. For Ilara, salvation came not from the polished halls of civilization, but from the raw, untamed heart of the wilderness itself, embodied in the quiet strength of a man who saw past her societal trappings and recognized the luminous courage within her. In the vast, sprawling canvas of the American West, where the horizon stretched endlessly and the wind carried the ancient whispers of the land, there existed a silent language, spoken not through words, but through the stark realities of survival. This was a world where a woman's worth was often measured by her ability to endure, to adapt, to find strength in solitude. Ilara's journey into this unforgiving expanse began not with a choice, but with a sentence, a condemnation from her own family. Her father, a man of rigid principles and unyielding pride, had disowned her following a scandal, a fabricated accusation that smeared her good name and shattered her future. Her brother, once a trusted confidant, had stood by, silent and complicit, his gaze averted, his loyalty irrevocably shifted by the promise of inheritance and social standing. The sting of their betrayal was a wound deeper than any physical injury, a constant ache in her soul that no amount of time or distance could entirely heal. She was cast out, a pariah in a society that valued reputation above truth, forced to fend for herself with meager savings and the faint hope of a new beginning somewhere beyond the reach of their judgment. Her trek westward had been arduous, a grueling test of her physical and emotional limits. She had faced hunger, sickness, and the chilling loneliness that only vast, empty spaces can evoke. The kindness of strangers, fleeting as it was, had sustained her, but it could not erase the gnawing fear that accompanied every solitary mile. Now, as the blizzard raged, stripping the landscape bare, she felt the last vestiges of her strength ebbing away. Her small bundle, containing a change of clothes, a few precious keepsakes, and the worn book, felt impossibly heavy. The book, a collection of classical poetry, was her last link to the cultured life she had lost, a source of comfort in the desolate wilderness. She recalled lines about resilience, about enduring storms, and a faint, almost imperceptible spark of courage rekindled within her. She would not surrender. Not yet. Not while a breath remained in her body. The ground beneath her feet was no longer discernible, a seamless expanse of white that blended with the churning sky. Disorientation set in, a dizzying spiral of cold and exhaustion. She stumbled, falling to her knees, the impact jarring her to the bone. Her hands, raw and chapped, sunk into the icy snow, and for a moment, she closed her eyes, contemplating the sweet release of simply letting go. To succumb to the cold, to drift into a dreamless sleep, seemed an inviting prospect. But then, a memory, vivid and piercing, flashed before her eyes, the gentle touch of her mother's hand, the warmth of a hearth fire, the sound of laughter. These fragments of a lost past spurred her on, infusing her with a renewed, albeit fragile, determination. She would not let their cruelty be her end. She would fight. She would survive. Just as she pushed herself up, bracing against the gale, a shadow detached itself from the swirling snow, growing larger, more defined. It was a horse, its breath steaming in the frigid air, its powerful frame a formidable presence in the whiteout. And upon its back, a figure, tall and imposing, wrapped in furs, his face obscured by the swirling blizzard. Fear, primal and immediate, surged through Ilara. Was this a harbinger of further misfortune, a lone bandit preying on the weak, or something far more menacing? Her heart pounded against her ribs, a frantic drum against the encroaching silence. She instinctively recoiled, her hand moving to clutch the book to her chest as if it could offer protection. But the figure, instead of menacing her, dismounted with a fluid grace that spoke of strength and familiarity with the harsh terrain. He moved towards her, his movements purposeful, unhurried, yet radiating an undeniable power. As he drew closer, his features, partially veiled by the snow, began to emerge. Dark, piercing eyes that seemed to hold the ancient wisdom of the plains, a strong jawline, and a stoic expression that betrayed little emotion. He was a man of the land, sculpted by its relentless forces, imbued with its quiet strength. He was a Kiowa brave, his presence both startling and utterly unexpected in her desolate journey. The language barrier was immediate, a chasm between two worlds, two vastly different lives. Yet, in his gaze, Ilara perceived something beyond simple curiosity, a flicker of concern, a quiet understanding of her desperate plight. He extended a gloved hand, not in aggression, but in an unspoken offer of assistance. A silent question hung in the air, a profound moment of choice. To trust or to flee? To accept help from this formidable stranger, a man of a different race, a different culture, or to succumb to the blizzard's icy embrace? Her instincts, honed by weeks of survival, urged caution. Yet, her heart, weary and bruised, yearned for a respite, for even a momentary reprieve from the relentless fight. This unexpected encounter, on the cusp of despair, presented a path she had never imagined, a twist of fate that would forever alter the trajectory of her life. It was a pivotal moment, a crossroad where hope and fear converged, where the unknown promised both peril and a chance at salvation. She looked from his extended hand to his dark, unreadable eyes, and in that fleeting instant, a decision, born of desperation and a fragile spark of hope, was made. This stoic protector, emerging from the heart of the storm, would unknowingly become the anchor she so desperately needed. The Kiowa brave, whose name she would later learn was Kian, spoke in a low, guttural tongue, a language as foreign to Elara as the icy wind that whipped around them. Yet, his voice, though unfamiliar, held a resonance, a quiet authority that transcended words. He gestured towards his horse, a powerful, dark-maned Mustang, its breath steaming in the frigid air. The message was clear: shelter, warmth, a chance at survival. Elara, her limbs trembling from cold and exhaustion, could only nod, a silent acknowledgement of her desperate need. Her pride, once a formidable barrier, had crumbled in the face of absolute peril. She was a woman of refinement, educated and genteel, yet here, on the edge of oblivion, such distinctions held no sway. Survival was the only currency, and this stoic stranger offered it freely. Kian, with a strength that seemed effortless, lifted her onto the horse's back, her slight frame feeling almost weightless in his powerful arms. The warmth of the animal's hide, even through her thin clothing, was a welcome comfort, a small reprieve from the biting cold that had seeped into her very bones. He then mounted behind her, his large frame shielding her from the brunt of the wind, his presence a solid, unyielding anchor in the swirling chaos. They rode in silence, the only sounds the crunch of snow beneath the horse's hooves and the relentless howl of the blizzard. Elara leaned against Kian's broad back, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth radiating from his body. It was an intimacy born not of affection, but of necessity, a fragile bubble of humanity against the vast, indifferent wilderness. She risked a glance over her shoulder, trying to discern his features through the falling snow. His profile was strong, etched with the lines of experience, his gaze fixed forward, guiding them through the whiteout with an unerring instinct that spoke of deep familiarity with the land. He was a sentinel, a silent guardian against the encroaching darkness. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only an hour or so, the horse veered sharply, and the wind's intensity seemed to lessen. Before them, nestled into a natural depression, was a small, unassuming cabin, its logs weathered and aged, a wisp of smoke curling from its stone chimney. It was a beacon of hope, a sanctuary in the heart of the storm. Kian dismounted first, his movements quick and efficient, then reached up to help Elara down. Her legs, stiff and numb, almost gave way beneath her, but he steadied her, his grip firm and reassuring. He led her towards the cabin door, the scent of burning wood and something savory, perhaps stew, drifting out to meet them. The contrast with the howling wilderness outside was stark, a sudden immersion into warmth and security. Inside, the cabin was small but meticulously kept, a testament to Kian's solitary existence. A roaring fire blazed in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. A rough-hewn table and 2 chairs occupied the center of the room, and a cot, covered with thick furs, was tucked into a corner. The air was thick with the scent of pine and wood smoke, a comforting aroma that promised safety. Kian gestured towards the fire, indicating she should warm herself. He then moved to a small kettle simmering over the flames, pouring a steaming, fragrant liquid into a clay mug. He offered it to her, his dark eyes conveying a quiet command. Elara accepted it gratefully, her frozen fingers trembling as they wrapped around the warm mug. The liquid, a rich, herbal tea, was infused with a subtle sweetness, a soothing balm to her chilled body. As the warmth spread through her, a wave of profound relief washed over her, momentarily eclipsing the lingering fear and anxiety. She watched him as he moved about the cabin, tending to the horse in a lean-to attached to the side, then returning to stoke the fire, his movements economical and strong. He was a man of few words, his actions speaking volumes. He was a protector, a provider, a silent guardian. He never spoke of her past, never asked about her journey, never pried into the circumstances that had brought her to his isolated cabin in the heart of a blizzard. His silence was not indifferent, but respectful, a quiet acknowledgement of her privacy and her pain. As the days bled into weeks, the blizzard eventually yielding to the harsh beauty of winter, Elara found herself settling into an unexpected rhythm of life in Kian's cabin. The initial fear gave way to a fragile trust, then a quiet understanding. She learned his routines, rising with the sun, tending to his traps, hunting for game, and meticulously caring for his horses. She, in turn, found purpose in the domestic tasks, cleaning the small cabin, preparing simple meals from the provisions he brought back, and learning to identify the various herbs he used for teas and poultices. Their communication remained largely unspoken, a dance of gestures, shared glances, and the comfortable silence that settled between them as they went about their daily chores. He taught her to distinguish animal tracks in the snow, to identify edible plants, and to read the subtle signs of the changing weather. She, in turn, shared stories from her past, tales of a different world, of books and music and the bustling life of a frontier town. He listened patiently, his dark eyes fixed on her, absorbing every word, every nuance of her voice. Through these shared moments, a connection began to form, a bond woven from mutual respect and an unspoken gratitude. She saw the profound sadness in his eyes, the lingering echoes of a past trauma that mirrored her own. He, in turn, saw beyond her genteel upbringing, recognizing the fierce spirit and quiet resilience that had allowed her to survive. The cabin, once a simple refuge, transformed into a sanctuary, a haven where two disparate souls, both scarred by life's cruelties, found solace and an unexpected sense of belonging. The frontier, once a symbol of her abandonment, slowly began to reveal its raw, majestic beauty, a reflection of the burgeoning hope within her heart. This isolated existence, far from the judgment of her family and the rigid expectations of society, allowed her to shed the layers of her past, to rediscover herself not as a victim, but as a survivor, a woman capable of forging her own destiny. Kian, the stoic protector, had not only saved her life but had also, inadvertently, shown her the path to reclaiming her own strength. The long, isolated winter in Kian's cabin became a season of quiet transformation for Elara. Stripped of the superficialities of her former life, she found herself confronting the raw essence of her being. The constant threat of the wilderness, though ever-present, was a tangible danger, far simpler to contend with than the insidious betrayal of her own family. Here, in the heart of the vast plains, with Kian as her silent guardian, she began to heal. Her hands, once accustomed to delicate needlework and the turning of book pages, grew calloused and strong, adapting to the demands of frontier life. She learned to mend clothes, to prepare game, and to keep the small cabin a sanctuary of warmth and order. Each small accomplishment was a victory, a testament to her burgeoning resilience. Kian, ever watchful, observed her progress with an unspoken approval. He saw the flicker of life returning to her eyes, the growing confidence in her posture. He taught her the practical skills necessary for survival, how to track, how to identify medicinal plants, how to read the subtle shifts in the wind that heralded changes in the weather. He never explicitly offered to teach her how to shoot, but one afternoon, as she watched him clean his rifle with meticulous care, he simply placed it in her hands, his dark eyes meeting hers with an unspoken challenge. The weight of the cold steel felt foreign, formidable, yet a spark of defiance ignited within her. She learned to aim, to steady her breath, to understand the deadly precision of the weapon. It was a harsh lesson, a jarring contrast to the gentle rhythms of her past, but it instilled in her a sense of agency, a quiet understanding that she was no longer entirely helpless. Their shared existence was a delicate balance of self-sufficiency and mutual dependence. He provided the necessities, the sustenance from the land, the protection from external threats. She, in turn, brought a quiet grace to his solitary life, filling the cabin with a warmth that went beyond the roaring fire. She read aloud from her worn book of poetry, her voice soft yet resonant, transporting them both to distant lands and forgotten ages. Kian, despite his gruff exterior, listened with a captivating intensity, his stoic facade momentarily softening. He shared stories of his people, of the Kiowa traditions and beliefs, of the deep reverence for the land and its creatures. He spoke of the buffalo, of ancient hunting grounds, of the spiritual connection that bound his people to the vast plains. Ilara listened with rapt attention, her understanding of the world expanding beyond the narrow confines of her own upbringing. She saw the wisdom in his words, the profound spirituality that resonated deeply with the natural beauty surrounding them. The language barrier, once a formidable chasm, slowly began to bridge. She picked up fragments of his tongue, simple words and phrases, and he, in turn, learned rudimentary English words from her. They communicated through a blend of their native languages, gestures, and the universal language of shared experience. One evening, as the last rays of sunlight painted the western hills in hues of fiery orange and deep violet, Kian spoke of his own past, a rare glimpse into the pain that shadowed his eyes. He spoke of loss, of a family taken by disease, of the profound solitude that had driven him to this isolated existence. His voice, usually so measured, held a tremor of ancient grief, a raw vulnerability that touched Ilara's heart. She reached out, her hand gently touching his arm, a silent offering of comfort. In that moment, their shared pain forged a bond stronger than words, a recognition of two souls who had both faced the crucible of loss and emerged, scarred but not broken. The quiet camaraderie between them deepened, evolving into something more profound, more tender. A hesitant touch, a lingering glance, a shared smile over a simple meal, these were the subtle indicators of a burgeoning affection. The fear of loneliness, once a constant companion, began to recede, replaced by a growing sense of belonging, a quiet joy in the shared existence. The cabin, which had once felt like a temporary refuge, slowly became home. Ilara found herself envisioning a future here, in this raw, untamed land, with this stoic, honorable man who had unexpectedly become her anchor. The thought of returning to her former life, to the judgment and betrayal of her family, now seemed distant, unappealing. This new life, though challenging, offered a freedom and authenticity she had never known. But the frontier, as vast and beautiful as it was also a place of unpredictable dangers. The peace they had found was fragile, a delicate bloom in a harsh environment, and external threats loomed, waiting for the opportune moment to shatter their nascent happiness. The very forces that had driven Ilara into this wilderness, the greed and cruelty of man, had not entirely vanished. They merely awaited their time to reappear, to test the strength of the bond that had formed between the resilient survivor and her stoic protector. Their sanctuary, so carefully built, remained vulnerable. As spring hesitantly began to unfurl its green tendrils across the plains, bringing with it the promise of renewal, a shadow from Ilara's past began to stir. Her father, a man whose pride was as vast as the western sky, eventually discovered her whereabouts. It was not a sudden revelation, but a slow, insidious creeping of information, carried by whispers and rumors across dusty miles. He had learned of her survival, of her unexpected refuge, and more importantly, of her continued refusal to return to the life he had dictated for her. His anger, fueled by a rigid sense of social order and his unyielding desire to control his family's narrative, simmered like a distant prairie fire. He commissioned a man named Silas Blackwood, a notorious and avaricious rancher with a reputation for ruthless efficiency, to retrieve her. Silas was a man sculpted by greed and entitlement, his eyes cold and calculating, his smile a thin, predatory line. He saw Ilara not as a woman, but as property, a means to an end, a valuable asset whose return would bring him considerable remuneration and social standing with her powerful father. He envisioned her as a pliable, broken thing, easily manipulated into fulfilling his own dark desires. Blackwood, accompanied by two equally brutish henchmen, arrived in the small, dusty settlement closest to Kian's cabin, his presence casting a pall over the quiet community. His inquiries about Ilara were menacing, laced with an implied threat that silenced any potential informers. However, the whispers eventually reached the ears of a kind-hearted trader, a man who had shown Ilara small mercies during her arduous journey. Recognizing the danger, he risked his own safety to send a messenger, a young, swift rider, to warn Kian and Ilara. The messenger arrived at their cabin just as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery hues. He delivered his urgent warning in hushed, breathless tones, his eyes wide with fear. Blackwood was coming. He sought Ilara, and he was known for his brutality. Kian listened, his expression hardening, his hands clenching into fists. The peace they had painstakingly built, the fragile happiness they had found, was suddenly under siege. Ilara felt a chill of dread creep into her heart, a cold premonition of the violence that was about to shatter their sanctuary. The specter of her past, of the cruelty and injustice that had driven her into the wilderness, had finally caught up. But this time, she was not alone. Kian stood beside her, his presence a formidable bulwark against the encroaching darkness. There was no hesitation in his gaze, no question of abandoning her. His commitment was absolute, his determination to protect her unwavering. "He will not touch you," Kian stated, his voice low and resolute, his dark eyes burning with a fierce, protective fire. It was a promise, a vow, spoken not with bravado, but with the quiet conviction of a man who understood the true meaning of honor. Ilara, looking at his unwavering face, felt a surge of courage. She had faced abandonment and despair alone before, but now, she had an ally, a partner in the face of this renewed threat. Her journey from victim to survivor had led her to this moment, to stand firm alongside the man who had shown her unconditional kindness. The confrontation was inevitable. Kian, a man of peace but fiercely protective, understood that Blackwood would not be deterred by words. He began to prepare, checking his rifle, sharpening his hunting knife, his movements deliberate and focused. Ilara watched him, her heart pounding, but a newfound strength settled within her. She was no longer the frightened, helpless woman who had collapsed in the snow. The lessons Kian had taught her, the resilience she had cultivated, would now be put to the ultimate test. They spent the next few days in a state of heightened alert, Kian meticulously fortifying the cabin, setting small, almost imperceptible traps around the perimeter. He taught Ilara how to load the rifle, how to position herself for defense, how to respond to an intrusion. Her hands, though still trembling, moved with a newfound precision. She was no longer just the damsel in distress, she was a participant in her own survival, a partner in this desperate struggle. The air grew heavy with anticipation, the quiet of the plains now punctuated by the subtle sounds of their preparations. Each creak of the floorboards, each rustle of leaves outside, heightened their senses. They knew Blackwood would come, that he would not rest until he had achieved his malicious objective. But they also knew that they would not surrender. This isolated cabin, their sanctuary, would become their fortress, and they would defend it with every fiber of their being. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation, a clash between the forces of greed and honor, cruelty and unwavering love. The frontier, unforgiving and vast, would bear witness to their fight. Silas Blackwood, driven by a blend of entitlement and a cold, calculating ambition, did not take long to find Kian's cabin. He rode with his two henchmen, their faces grim and unyielding, across the rolling plains, leaving a trail of unease in their wake. They were a grim procession, their presence an unwelcome stain on the pristine landscape. Blackwood, a man who believed power was wielded through fear and brute force, assumed his approach would be met with immediate surrender. He saw the isolated cabin as an easy target, the Kiowa brave a mere inconvenience, and Ilara a trophy to be claimed. He knew nothing of the bond that had forged between them, nothing of the strength Ilara had cultivated, nothing of the unwavering resolve of Kian, who considered her safety his sacred duty. They arrived at dusk, their horses kicking up dust, their silhouettes stark against the fading light. Blackwood dismounted, his boots crunching on the dry earth, his eyes scanning the cabin with a predatory gleam. "Ilara!" he bellowed, his voice coarse and arrogant, echoing across the silent plains. Your father demands your return. Come out now and no one gets hurt. From within the cabin, silence was their only answer. Kian had instructed Alara to stay hidden, to remain out of sight, a strategy designed to buy them precious moments and to protect her from Blackwood's initial fury. He stood at a narrow window, his rifle held ready, his gaze steady and unwavering. I know you're in there, Redskin. Blackwood sneered, his tone dripping with contempt. Send the woman out, and you might just keep your scalp. Kian's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, unwilling to engage in the verbal taunts. He knew that words were meaningless to a man like Blackwood. Action was the only language he understood. Blackwood, growing impatient, motioned to his men. Break down that door, he commanded. The two henchmen, burly and menacing, advanced towards the cabin, their rifles raised. As they reached the entrance, a sharp crack pierced the evening air. One of the henchmen cried out, clutching his arm as blood blossomed through his shirt sleeve. He stumbled back, his rifle clattering to the ground. Kian had fired a warning shot, a precise, calculated action designed not to kill, but to incapacitate and to demonstrate his deadly accuracy. The message was clear. This was not an easy target. Blackwood's sneer faltered, replaced by a flicker of surprise, then a surge of cold fury. You'll pay for that, savage, he roared, drawing his own pistol. He fired wildly at the cabin, his shots splintering the wood, but Kian remained concealed, a ghost in the shadows. The standoff began, a tense, nerve-wracking waiting game. Blackwood and his remaining henchmen took cover behind their horses, returning fire, their shots largely ineffective against the fortified cabin. Alara, hidden beneath the thick furs of the cot, listened to the cacophony of gunfire, her heart pounding like a drum. But interspersed with the fear was a strange sense of calm, a resolute determination. She was no longer a helpless victim. She had a role to play. Kian, moving with the quiet grace of a seasoned hunter, maintained his defensive positions. He knew the land, knew the cabin's vulnerabilities and its strengths. He used the cover of darkness, the natural contours of the terrain, to his advantage. He would not allow Blackwood to breach their sanctuary. As the night deepened, a momentary lull in the firing settled upon the plains. Kian took the opportunity to reposition, slipping silently from one window to another, his movements almost imperceptible. He needed to break their standoff, to assert their dominance, to send a clear message that this fight would not be easily won. He spotted the remaining henchmen attempting to flank the cabin, trying to find a blind spot. Kian raised his rifle, took careful aim, and fired. The shot found its mark, narrowly missing the man but forcing him to retreat, scrambling back to Blackwood's side, clearly shaken. Blackwood, realizing that direct assault was proving futile, changed tactics. He began shouting threats, promising to burn the cabin, to leave them to the mercy of the wilderness. He wanted to break their spirit, to force Alara out. You can't hide forever, girl, he yelled, his voice laced with malice. Your father wants you back, and I will have my bounty. It was then that Alara, fueled by a surge of defiance, made her move. She had been observing Kian, remembering his lessons. She carefully loaded her own rifle, her hands steady, her breath controlled. When Kian signaled for her to cover the opposite window, she moved into position, her heart thumping but her resolve unshakable. She saw Blackwood, exposed for a moment as he reloaded his pistol. Without hesitation, she took aim and fired. The shot was not intended to kill, but to disable. The bullet struck the ground near Blackwood's feet, kicking up dust and forcing him to recoil, his arrogant confidence momentarily shattered. A gasp escaped him, a sound of genuine surprise and frustration. He had underestimated her, underestimated both of them. The realization that Alara was not the compliant victim he expected, that she too was capable of defiance and defense, was a bitter pill for his inflated ego. The battle for their sanctuary, for their shared future, had truly begun. And in that moment, Alara, the woman once abandoned and helpless, stood shoulder to shoulder with her stoic protector, a formidable force against the darkness of her past. The sound of Alara's shot, though not a direct hit, resonated across the plains, an unmistakable declaration of defiance. Silas Blackwood, whose worldview hinged on the subjugation of the weak, was momentarily stunned. He had expected a cowering woman, not a determined fighter. The realization that Ilara was not only refusing to surrender but was actively participating in the defense of the cabin fueled his rage, transforming his calculated cruelty into a desperate, vindictive fury. "You little wildcat," he roared, his voice hoarse with indignation. "You'll regret this." He fired another volley of shots at the cabin, but his aim was erratic, born of frustration rather than precision. Kian, sensing Blackwood's escalating desperation, knew that the time for a decisive move was at hand. He could not afford to let the standoff drag on. Blackwood might call for reinforcements, or worse, attempt to set the cabin ablaze as he had threatened. He needed to end this. Kian, using the cover of darkness and the brief distraction caused by Blackwood's outburst, slipped silently from the cabin. He moved with the stealth of a predator, utilizing the natural terrain, a small rise, a cluster of rocks, the long, swaying prairie grass, to conceal his movements. Ilara, watching from the window, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and admiration, knew what he was doing. He was circling, seeking an advantage, preparing to confront Blackwood directly. She maintained her position at the window, her rifle steady, her gaze fixed on Blackwood and his remaining henchmen. She understood her role, to provide cover, to ensure that Blackwood remained pinned down, unaware of Kian's flanking maneuver. The tension was almost unbearable, a tangible presence in the small cabin. Each rustle of wind, each distant animal call, heightened her senses. Suddenly, a guttural cry pierced the night, followed by a grunt of pain. Ilara saw a flash of movement, a blur in the darkness. Kian, having approached from the rear, had engaged Blackwood's remaining henchmen. The fight was swift and brutal, a silent dance of strength and skill. Within moments, the henchmen lay sprawled on the ground, incapacitated. Blackwood, alerted by the sounds of the struggle, whirled around, his eyes wide with a sudden, primal fear. He saw Kian, a formidable silhouette against the starlit sky, his rifle still in hand, his gaze unwavering. For the first time, Blackwood truly understood the depth of the danger he faced. This was no ordinary man. This was a warrior of the plains, a protector with an unshakable resolve. You savage!" Blackwood stammered, his voice losing its arrogant edge, replaced by a tremor of genuine terror. He tried to raise his pistol, but Kian was faster. With a fluid, powerful movement, Kian disarmed him, sending the pistol skittering across the ground. Blackwood stumbled backward, his face contorted in a desperate attempt to regain control. Kian advanced slowly, deliberately, his presence radiating an undeniable power. He spoke in a low, resonant voice, a mix of Kiowa and broken English, his words carrying the weight of his resolve. "She is mine. You do not touch her. You do not return." His words were a final, chilling warning, a promise of swift and deadly retribution if Blackwood dared to cross him again. Blackwood, finally broken, understood. The raw, untamed power of Kian, combined with Ilara's unexpected defiance, had shattered his carefully constructed illusion of control. He was no longer the hunter, he was the hunted. His arrogance had given way to a profound, visceral fear. He scrambled to his feet, his bravado utterly extinguished, and without another word, he mounted his horse. His remaining henchman, injured but conscious, was left to fend for himself. Blackwood, driven by a desperate need for self-preservation, spurred his horse into a frantic gallop, vanishing into the darkness, leaving behind only the fading echoes of his retreat. Kian watched him go, his expression grim but resolute. The threat had been neutralized, the immediate danger averted. He returned to the cabin, his movements as silent and purposeful as before. Ilara rushed to him, her heart overflowing with relief and a profound gratitude. She embraced him, her arms wrapping around his strong, unyielding frame, burying her face against his chest. He held her close, his arms a protective circle around her, his touch a silent reassurance. The battle was over. Their sanctuary was safe. In the aftermath, Kian tended to the injured henchman, binding his wounds with a quiet efficiency, then sending him on his way with a stern warning to never return. The plains, once alive with the cacophony of conflict, slowly settled back into their natural rhythm, the only sounds the whispering wind and the distant cries of nocturnal animals. That night, as they sat by the fire, the tension finally dissipating, Elara looked at Kian, her eyes filled with a new depth of understanding and affection. He had not just protected her, he had fought for her, risking his life to defend their shared existence. He was her protector, her anchor, the man who had shown her the true meaning of courage and loyalty. The frontier, once a symbol of her abandonment, was now a testament to her strength, a backdrop to a love story forged in the crucible of adversity. With Silas Blackwood's ignominious retreat, a profound peace settled over Kian's cabin, deeper and more resonant than any they had known before. The external threat, a physical manifestation of Elara's past, had been vanquished, leaving behind a space for their burgeoning love to fully blossom. The confrontation had not only solidified their bond but had also clarified their future. There was no longer any question of Elara returning to her old life. That path was irrevocably closed, and a new one, richer and more meaningful, lay open before them. The shared experience of defending their home, of standing together against a common enemy, had forged an unbreakable connection between them. In the quiet days that followed, the unspoken affection between them found its voice. Kian, a man of few words, expressed his devotion through his actions. The careful way he looked at her, the gentle touch of his hand, the way he ensured her comfort and safety above all else. Elara, in turn, allowed herself to fully embrace the love that had grown so organically from shared hardship. She had found not just a protector, but a soulmate, a man whose quiet strength and unwavering honor resonated deeply with her own resilient spirit. Their wedding was a simple, heartfelt affair, performed by a traveling preacher who stumbled upon their isolated cabin weeks later. There were no elaborate gowns, no grand celebrations, only the vast, open sky as their cathedral and the whispering wind as their witness. They exchanged vows under the golden light of a prairie sunset, their promises echoing across the silent plains, a sacred pact between two souls united by destiny. Kian, dressed in his finest buckskins, his dark eyes radiating a quiet joy,